When she said those words, so casually, so sweetly, I felt the air in the room change. Not in a dramatic way, not like thunder or shouting, but like when you're sitting in a warm room and suddenly realize the window's been open all along, and the cold has been seeping in slowly, quietly, without you noticing. That was the moment everything began to unravel. Before that day, I would have told anyone that I was lucky to have a son like Daniel. Respectful, soft-spoken, the kind of man who still kissed his mother's cheek every Sunday after lunch. Lucky that he found a wife like Clara, warm, polite, the kind of woman who knew how to make you feel included. And lucky, above all, that after years of raising him on my own, I finally had a reason to cook for more than one person again. I live in a modest house just outside of Baton Rouge. It's quiet here. Mornings start with the sound of the neighbor's rooster and the smell of chicory coffee. My back porch faces the bayou, and sometimes, when the light hits just right, the water turns gold. That's when I feel closest to peace. Before Clara came into our lives, Daniel used to visit every week without fail. We'd talk about his work, his plans, the weather, the kind of conversations that sit easy in the chest. But after he got married, his visits became less frequent. "We've been so busy, Mom," he'd say, always with that apologetic smile. I told myself that's how life goes. Children grow. They make homes of their own. A mother's job is to let go gently. Still, when they called one evening to say they were coming over for Sunday lunch, I cleaned the house like I was preparing for guests from heaven. I even polished the old dining table, the one Daniel had done his homework on, the one I'd kept, though half its legs were uneven. Clara brought flowers. She always did. Lilies this time, white, fragrant, almost too perfect. She hugged me tightly, and for a brief second I felt her heart racing against mine. "Mama Ruth," she said softly, "we missed you," I smiled. "You always say that when you want an extra piece of pie." She laughed, and Daniel joined in. The sound filled my kitchen, that warm, clattering, homely noise I'd missed so much. I didn't know it then, but that lunch would be the last time I felt simple happiness in that room. It was 2 weeks later when she asked. I remember because it was a Thursday, and Thursdays were my quiet days. I'd been sitting in my small living room, balancing my checkbook. Old habits die hard. Even after retiring, I still like to keep track of every penny, not because I was stingy, but because when you've lived through the kind of years I have, you learn to respect money. It's not everything, but it's protection. It's independence. The phone rang, and it was Clara. Her voice had that cheerful lift to it, the kind people use when they're hiding nerves behind a smile. "Mama Ruth," she said, "are you busy?" "No, sweetheart. Just making sure the numbers behave themselves." She laughed. "You and your checkbook. I swear, Daniel says you could run a whole bank if you wanted to." "Well," I teased, "I'd have to charge you interest." There was a pause. Just a heartbeat. Then she said lightly, "Speaking of banks, I actually wanted to ask you something. Now, maybe it's a mother's instinct, or maybe it's the way she said it, a little too careful, like she'd rehearsed it in her head." Whatever it was, I straightened in my chair. "Go on," I said. "Well," she began, "I've been trying to apply for this small business loan. You know, for that online boutique I've been planning. But the thing is, my credit score isn't great right now. I just need to use someone else's account to receive the funds. Just for a short while, nothing serious. I thought maybe you could help me, just by letting them use your bank details for the deposit." I remember staring at the phone in silence, trying to understand if I'd heard right. "You mean my personal account?" I asked slowly. "Yes, just for a few weeks," she said quickly. "It would really mean the world to me. I'll handle all the paperwork. You won't have to do a thing." My first instinct was confusion. Then came that slow warmth in my chest. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that comes with unease. "Like a warning, Clara," I said gently. "Why not ask Daniel?" Another pause. "Oh, he's already helping in other ways." I didn't want to worry him about the financial stuff. You know how he gets. No, I didn't know. Because Daniel and I used to talk about everything, especially money. It was one of the few things we were always transparent about. So hearing her say that felt like a small lie dressed up as care. Still, I didn't want to sound mistrustful. I told her I'd think about it. She thanked me, over and over again, and hung up before I could ask any more questions. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the quiet glow of the lamp on my coffee table. The air felt thicker somehow. My gut told me something was off, but I brushed it aside. Maybe it was just the way she'd asked. Young people had a different way of doing things these days. Maybe she really did just need help. So I told myself to be generous, to be the kind of mother-in-law who supports her family. But later that night, when I logged into my online banking just to look, just to be sure, I noticed something odd. A small withdrawal. $500. Not much, but not mine. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transactions. There it was, a transfer I didn't remember making. I clicked on it. The account name was unfamiliar, and yet somehow it felt close. I called Daniel immediately, heart pounding, but he didn't pick up. I sent him a message, call me when you can. No reply. The next morning, Clara texted me. Thank you again for helping me, Mama Ruth. You're the best. I stared at that message for a long time, the words swimming on the screen. I hadn't said yes. Not officially. I hadn't given her any details, had I? Then it hit me. A few weeks ago, she'd offered to help me set up my online account because, as she said, those bank websites can be tricky. She'd asked for my login info then, and I'd given it to her. Trusting her completely, my throat went dry. My heart sank into a slow, heavy rhythm. Something was very, very wrong. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers. Balances, withdrawals, transfers, flashing behind my eyelids. By dawn, my stomach was in knots. I brewed coffee just for the comfort of the smell, even though I couldn't bring myself to drink it. At 8:17 a.m., Daniel finally called back. His voice sounded tired, distracted, like he was half listening to something else while talking to me. Hey, Mom, everything okay? I hope so, I said carefully. There was a small withdrawal from my account yesterday. Did you or Clara need to use my card for something? There was a pause, long enough for my heart to race. Then a quick, casual laugh. Oh, that, he said. Yeah, Clara mentioned you were helping her with her business thing. Don't worry. She's just testing something with the loan deposit. Testing something. He said it like it was nothing. Like I hadn't spent 40 years saving every penny I could after his father died, just to make sure neither of us ever had to test something again. I didn't agree to that, I said quietly. Mom, he sighed. Come on. It's just temporary. She'll pay it back. You know Clara. She's responsible. I wanted to say, no, I don't know her. Not really, but I swallowed the words. Okay, I murmured. Just keep me updated, all right? Of course, he said quickly. Love you, Mom. Then he hung up before I could ask another question. For the next week, I watched my bank account like a hawk. Every morning before the sun rose, I'd sit in my robe and log in, fingers trembling slightly, and every morning, the numbers changed, little by little. $300 one day, $200 the next, then a big one, $2,000 gone in a blink. Each time, the withdrawal went to the same account name. The same faceless string of letters. And each time, my chest tightened a little more. Finally, I drove to the bank. The branch manager, a middle-aged man named Mr. Landry, knew me by name. He'd seen me deposit my small pension checks every month, always balancing the ledger myself. When I told him what was happening, he frowned, clicked through a few screens, and then looked up with that polite, measured expression people use when they don't want to alarm you. Mrs. Harper, he said softly, these transfers were authorized through your online access. Whoever did this had your login information. My heart sank. Can you reverse them? Some, maybe, but others have already cleared. You'll need to file a fraud report. We can start the process right now. I nodded numbly. He handed me the forms. My pen shook so badly I could barely write. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. The receiving account. It's linked to a local gambling site. I'm sorry. I must have gone quiet because he leaned forward. Do you have any idea who could have done this? I swallowed hard. My tongue felt heavy. Yes, I whispered. I do. When I left the bank, the Louisiana sun was brutal, sharp and white, pressing down on everything. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of it all. Clara, my son's wife. The woman I'd hugged, fed, called daughter. She'd used me. I drove home on autopilot. When I got there, I found a small bouquet of flowers on my porch, lilies again, with a note that said, "Thinking of you, Mama Ruth." The handwriting was hers. I almost laughed. It was so neat, so careful, like everything she did. That night, I didn't call Daniel. I didn't call anyone. Instead, I sat by my kitchen window and thought about my mother. How she used to say that when people show you who they are, you better believe them the first time. I'd ignored the signs. The way Clara's eyes darted when money came up in conversation. The way Daniel had started avoiding the subject of bills. But I believed in family. I believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, and they had taken that belief and hollowed it out until it was empty. 2 days later, Daniel came by, alone. He looked nervous, shifting from foot to foot like a boy again. "Clara's at her parents'," he said as he sat down. "She's been really stressed. I just thought I'd check in on you." I poured him coffee, even though my hands were cold. "Daniel," I said quietly. "I went to the bank." His eyes flickered up. "Oh?" "They told me about the gambling account." The silence that followed was so thick, I could hear the refrigerator hum in the corner. Finally, he sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "I was going to tell you, Mom. It's just complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "She stole from me. She didn't mean to. She just got in over her head with some online betting thing. She thought she could fix it before you noticed. I told her it was wrong, but you let her." He closed his eyes. "I was trying to protect her." I stared at him. My son. The boy who used to cry when he accidentally broke a window. The man who promised his father's memory he'd always look after me. And now, he was sitting there defending the woman who drained my savings. "Daniel," I said softly. "How much?" He hesitated. Then, barely audible, "All of it." The room spun. The sound of the clock ticking became deafening. "All of it?" I whispered. He nodded, his eyes wet. "She said she'd win it back, Mom. She said—" I held up a hand. "Enough!" For a moment I couldn't feel my legs. I just sat there, breathing slowly, my throat burning. Then I stood. "You need to leave, Mom." "Go, Daniel." "Go before I say something I'll regret." He looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just stood, murmured a quiet, broken "I'm sorry," and left. The sound of the door closing behind him felt final. I stood in that silence for a long time, staring at the coffee cups we hadn't touched. Then I said it out loud, just to hear the truth of it. "My son and his wife stole from me." The words hung in the air like smoke. And for the first time in my life, I didn't cry, because somewhere deep inside me, something colder, sharper, had begun to take root. I wasn't just hurt anymore, I was planning. When anger sits inside you long enough, it doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It takes on the shape of silence, of patience, of strategy. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one Daniel had done his math homework on, the one now covered with printed bank statements and notes from the fraud report. I looked at every number until they stopped feeling like money and started feeling like time, years of scrimping. Decades of early mornings and careful planning, all drained away in someone else's gamble. I thought about calling the police. I thought about filing charges. But then I imagined Daniel in handcuffs, his face splashed across local news. I couldn't do that. Not yet. Instead, I decided something quieter. If Clara had thought she could use me, if Daniel thought he could stand beside her in silence, then they would both learn what happens when you take kindness for weakness. I wasn't going to scream or make a scene. No, I was going to make them see themselves. 3 days later, I called Clara. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my tone light, "would you and Daniel like to come over for Sunday lunch?" "I made your favorite, pot roast." Her voice brightened instantly. "Oh, Mama Ruth, that sounds wonderful." "We'd love to." "Good," I said, smiling at the empty room. It's been too long. After hanging up, I cleaned the house again. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because ritual gives structure to chaos. I set the table with my best china. I lit the vanilla candles Clara once said made the house feel expensive. I even put on my soft blue dress, the one Daniel said made me look like home. But beneath all that order, I felt something new, a current of quiet steel running through me. When they arrived that Sunday, they looked picture perfect. Clara's hair was curled. Daniel wore his pressed shirt. They smiled like nothing had happened. Mama Ruth. Clara beamed, handing me, again, a bouquet of lilies. I took them with a steady hand. "How thoughtful of you." She didn't notice that I didn't thank her. We sat down to eat. The table felt smaller than I remembered, the space between us filled with unspoken things. Halfway through dinner, I said, "Clara, how's your boutique coming along? I've been thinking maybe I could invest in it, if things are really moving forward." Her eyes lit up, the way they always did when money was mentioned. "Oh, Mama Ruth, that's so generous. I've been working hard, but we've had some setbacks." I nodded slowly. "Setbacks can be dangerous, especially when they involve gambling." The room went silent. Daniel's fork froze midair. Clara's smile faltered, then tried to rebuild itself. I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do," I said softly. "You've been using my account. You've been lying to me. Both of you." Her face drained of color. Daniel looked at the floor. I took a sip of water and set the glass down carefully. "I went to the bank, Clara. I know everything." For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Clara whispered, "Daniel said he'd handle it." I turned to my son. "And did you?" He didn't answer, so I looked back at her. This young woman I had once prayed would love my son the way I did. "You didn't just take money, Clara. You took trust. You took the one thing this family was built on." She started to cry then, small, careful tears that barely touched her cheeks. "I didn't mean to, Mama Ruth, I swear. I just thought—" "You thought what?" I asked, gently. "That I wouldn't notice? That I was old and careless?" "No," she said quickly. I was going to pay it back." "With what?" I asked. "Luck?" The question hung between us like smoke. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low. "Mom, please, we'll fix it. I'll get another job, we'll make it right." I studied him. The boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard now sat there, older, worn, smaller somehow. "You can't fix this with money, Daniel," I said softly. "Not this time." He dropped his head into his hands. Clara sniffled beside him, staring at her untouched plate. "I'm not pressing charges," I said finally, "but I want you both to understand something. You've broken something that doesn't mend easily. From now on, my finances are my own. You'll have no access, no passwords, no way to help me ever again." Clara nodded quickly, relief flooding her features. But I wasn't done. "And Daniel," I added, my tone sharpening just slightly, "you'll repay what was taken. Every dollar. Not because I need it, but because you need to remember what responsibility feels like." He nodded wordlessly. Then I stood and gathered the plates. "Now eat," I said quietly, "before it gets cold." They left after dessert, silent, uneasy. I watched them walk down the porch steps, Clara holding on to Daniel's arm a little too tightly, like she was afraid he'd crumble. When their car disappeared around the bend, I exhaled. My knees shook, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. Still, part of me knew this wasn't the end. People like Clara didn't stop at sorry. They waited for weakness, so I decided to end it my way, publicly, calmly and without raising my voice. The next week, I invited a few close friends for tea, women from church, my neighbor Elaine, even the bank manager's wife. And of course, I told Daniel and Clara they were welcome to join. Clara arrived wearing pearls. I almost laughed. During tea, I spoke easily, warmly, just as I always did. But as conversation drifted toward family businesses and financial trust, I let the story spill. Delicately, without names at first, how someone had betrayed me. How I'd learned the price of blind trust. How even family can forget their boundaries when temptation whispers. The room went still. Clara's spoon clinked against her teacup. Her smile cracked at the edges. When I finally said, "And sometimes, the thief sits right across from you." I didn't have to look to know everyone's eyes had shifted toward her. She tried to speak, but no sound came. Daniel put his hand over hers, but she pulled away. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood, poured myself another cup of tea and said, "Now, who'd like some lemon bars?" By the time they left that afternoon, Clara's face was pale as linen. Word travels fast in small towns and faster in church circles. By the next Sunday, people whispered when she walked in. Daniel stopped showing up for services altogether. I didn't need revenge. The truth had done the work for me, but still, late at night, I'd lie awake and wonder if I'd gone too far. If maybe humiliation was too heavy a punishment for love betrayed, then I'd remember the numbers on the screen, the hollow ache in my chest, and I'd think, no, I only gave them a mirror, and now they were finally forced to look. The following weeks unfolded like a quiet storm, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. At the grocery store, someone would glance up from the produce section, smile politely, and then lean toward a friend. At church, the same pew that once held my son and his wife sat empty, week after week. Clara stopped coming altogether. Daniel came alone once, his face drawn and tired, before disappearing again. I told myself I didn't care, that I was done. But the truth is, a mother never stops caring, no matter how much she's been hurt. Sometimes I'd stand at the kitchen window in the evenings, watching the streetlights blink on one by one, and I'd imagine him walking up the drive, apologizing, not just for the money, but for breaking something sacred. He never did. One afternoon, about 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Daniel's, a little messier than it used to be. Inside was a short note and a folded check. Mom, I've started repaying what I owe you. I don't expect forgiveness yet, but I'm trying to make things right. Love, Daniel. I stared at that check for a long time, not at the number, but at the handwriting. It trembled slightly, as if even the pen had been heavy in his hand. That was the first moment I felt something other than anger. I took a walk after that, down the old lane behind my house, past the weeping willow that leaned over the creek. The air smelled of pine and earth, the way it always did after rain, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders loosen. Maybe healing doesn't come from justice. Maybe it comes from release. A few weeks later, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, there stood Clara. She looked nothing like the polished girl who once glided through my living room with a smile and a bouquet. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, her makeup gone. She looked smaller somehow, softer. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd first asked for my bank details, where the world had quietly cracked open beneath me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, a bird sang. Finally, she said, "I don't expect you to forgive me." I nodded. Good, because forgiveness isn't something you ask for. It's something you earn. She looked down at her hands, twisting the ring Daniel had given her. I know, I wanted to tell you I'm sorry. Truly, I ruined everything. Daniel and we're separated now. The words landed quietly, without shock. Somewhere deep down, I'd expected it. She took a shaky breath. He tried to fix things, but it was too late. I hurt him and I hurt you, and I don't know how to fix it. I studied her face, the face I had once wanted to love like a daughter's. Beneath the guilt, I saw exhaustion, a kind of defeat that only comes from realizing you've been your own undoing. Clara, I said slowly, when you first came into this family, I thought you'd bring light to Daniel's life. And maybe you did for a while. But love without honesty doesn't last. It rots from the inside. She nodded, eyes glistening. I know, she whispered. I see that now. I was selfish. I thought I could fix everything if I just pretended hard enough. We sat in silence again. The air between us felt heavy, but not hateful. Finally, I said, "You don't owe me more apologies. What you owe yourself is change. Real change." She nodded again. Then, quietly, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "It's not everything," she said, "but it's a start. I sold some jewelry. The ones I bought with your money. I didn't take it right away. I just looked at her, really looked. And for a brief second, I saw the young woman she might have been if greed hadn't gotten in the way. Keep it," I said finally. "Use it to start over. Just don't ever take from someone's kindness again." Her lips trembled. "Thank you, Mama Ruth. I'm not your mama," I said gently. "Not anymore, but I do wish you peace." She nodded, stood, and left quietly. And for the first time since it all began, I felt no bitterness. Only a strange, clean ache, like the space left after a wound heals. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window. I thought about how life teaches you in ways you never ask for. Sometimes it takes betrayal to show you the strength you forgot you had. Sometimes it takes loss to remind you what you truly value. Daniel still sends checks every month. Small ones, but steady. We talk occasionally. Short, polite conversations. There's distance, but also respect now. And maybe that's enough. I've learned that motherhood doesn't mean shielding your children from consequences. It means letting them fall and trusting they'll rise on their own. As for me, I've started taking pottery classes at the community center. There's something peaceful about molding clay, turning something shapeless into something whole again. Maybe that's what healing is. Not forgetting, but reshaping what remains. A few months later, at a community fair, I saw Clara again. She was working at a small booth, selling handmade soaps and candles. She looked healthy, calmer. When she saw me, she hesitated, then smiled, a small, humble smile. I nodded in return, and that was enough. Some stories don't end with revenge or reconciliation. Some just end quietly, with two people walking separate roads, each carrying their own lessons. As I left the fair that day, I passed a little girl holding her mother's hand, laughing as her balloon tangled in the breeze, and I thought, maybe this is what forgiveness feels like, not a grand gesture, but the simple ability to breathe again. You know, when I look back now, it still amazes me how quietly a life can change. One moment, I was a proud mother, watching my son start his new chapter, believing our family had grown by one more heart. And then, in what felt like the blink of an eye, that same love turned into the deepest lesson I've ever had to learn. People often talk about betrayal like it's a knife, sharp, sudden, brutal. But in my experience, it's more like water slipping through your fingers. You don't notice what's missing until your hands are empty. When Clara first asked for my bank details, I didn't see it as the start of anything dangerous. It was such a small thing, a casual favor between family. That's the cruel thing about trust. It rarely breaks all at once. It fades, little by little, until one day you realize you're standing in the ruins of what used to feel safe. But here's the truth I've come to understand, and maybe it's one you'll hold on to. 2. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. It can refine you. It can take everything that was shattered inside you and force you to rebuild, piece by piece, stronger than before. When I confronted them that day, when I finally said no more, I didn't do it to humiliate them or get revenge. I did it because sometimes dignity is the only wealth you have left to protect. And now, sitting here years later, I realize that peace doesn't come from getting even. It comes from letting go. It comes from choosing not to carry their shame as your own. If I've learned anything, it's this. Family doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes it means disappointment, heartbreak, and starting over. But it also means having the courage to love again, differently, carefully, but still with an open heart. I don't know if my son and I will ever be as close as we once were. But I do know that when he looks at me now, he sees a woman who refused to be broken. And maybe that's enough, because at the end of the day, every story, even the painful ones, carries a seed of redemption. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is plant that seed, water it with tears, and trust that one day, something beautiful might grow from it. So, if you're listening to my story tonight, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, remember this. Your pain doesn't define you. Your response does. Don't let bitterness take root where healing belongs. Walk away with grace, and when you can, forgive, not for them, but for you, because peace, my dear, is the sweetest revenge of all. So tell me, my dear, if someone you loved betrayed your trust, your own child, your own family, would you have walked away like I did? Or would you have given them another chance? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below, and if my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay a while. There are many more stories to share, each one a reminder that even through heartbreak, we can still find our way home.